It started with a scream that sliced through the peaceful suburban air like a knife. I was in the garage, cleaning my motorcycle, lost in thought, when Megan's voice shattered everything. The panic in her voice jolted me to my feet. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out the side door, heart already racing. There, at the edge of our driveway, stood my wife visibly shaken, arm clenched by the rough hand of a man in a dark uniform with a cheap badge that read HOA compliance. Another man stood beside him, clipboard in hand, shouting something about unauthorized landscaping. Megan's eyes met mine, wide and pleading. I'd seen that look before back when I was on missions and things went south, but I never thought I'd see it again, especially not here, in the quiet neighborhood where we had hoped to start a new chapter. The man holding her arm was mid-sentence when he noticed me storming across the lawn. He tried to hold his ground, but his grip on Megan loosened. I could tell by the way he sized me up that he had no idea what he was walking into. I'm not the kind of guy who brags, but I spent nearly 15 years as a Navy SEAL. I've seen combat, disarmed bombs, and been face to face with people who meant serious harm. These guys, they were playing dress up still. Seeing someone touch my wife, like that, seeing her afraid, triggered something deep in me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just walked up to the guy, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Let go of my wife." Now, to his credit, he obeyed. But the other one, the one with the clipboard, stepped forward, trying to assert some authority. "Sir," he barked, "your wife violated HOA landscaping policy. She planted unapproved flora on community property. We have the right to—" "No," I interrupted. "You don't have the right to touch her. You don't have the right to intimidate her. And you sure as hell don't have the right to come onto my property and act like this is a battlefield." He scoffed. "We're within our jurisdiction." That's when I noticed Megan rubbing her arm. Her skin was red, beginning to bruise. That flipped a switch. I took a step closer. "You're about to learn the difference between authority and abuse. And trust me, you don't want to cross that line with me." His eyes flicked to his partner. They whispered. Then one of them pulled out a phone. "We're calling the police," he said, a smug grin spreading across his face. "You're threatening community officers." "Go ahead," I said, crossing my arms. "Please do." 15 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy pulled up. The officer stepped out, recognized me instantly, and gave me a respectful nod. "Lieutenant Burke, good to see you again," he said. "What's going on here?" Before I could answer, the HOA guys jumped in, spinning a tale about aggression and hostility. The deputy listened patiently, then turned to Megan and asked what happened. She explained everything, how she had planted some flowers near our mailbox, how they showed up without warning, started yelling, and how one of them grabbed her arm when she tried to walk away. Without a word, she rolled up her sleeve and showed him the bruise. That changed everything. The deputy's face hardened. He turned to the two men. "You're not law enforcement. You're not even security guards. If this woman presses charges, you could be facing assault." Suddenly, the two weren't so smug anymore. They stammered something about miscommunication and policy enforcement. The deputy waved it off. "You better leave." Now, as they retreated, the deputy turned back to me. "You want to file a report?" I looked at Megan. She shook her head. "Not yet," I said, "but if they come back, I won't be so patient." He nodded, gave me his card, and left. We stood in silence for a moment, just taking it in. The whole thing had escalated so fast, and yet, a deep anger simmered under the surface. I'd dealt with warlords and terrorists, but this was our home. This was supposed to be our safe place. I walked over to Megan, pulled her into a hug. She was still trembling. "I just wanted to make the yard look nice," she whispered. "I didn't know it would turn into this." "You did nothing wrong," I said, "and we're not going to let bullies in cheap uniforms push us around." What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that they hadn't just harassed any ordinary couple. They had messed with a SEAL's family. And I don't let anyone hurt the people I love. That day changed everything. It wasn't just about flowers anymore. It wasn't about a bruise or a policy violation. It was about standing up to power-hungry fools who thought fear could control a community. I wasn't going to let them win. And deep down, I had a feeling they'd soon realize exactly how badly they had misjudged who they were dealing with. By the next morning, word had spread like wildfire. The neighbors who normally just waved from their driveways were now stopping to ask questions. People we barely knew were knocking on our door, wanting to know what really happened. Apparently, the HOA's version of the story was already making the rounds, claiming that Megan attacked them and that I threatened to physically assault the officers. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so disturbing. That's when I realized this wasn't just a one-time incident. This HOA wasn't just power-hungry, they were dangerous. And we weren't the only ones they had gone after. Later that afternoon, Megan and I sat down on the porch, sipping coffee and trying to figure out what to do next. That's when our next-door neighbor, Carla, came over. She looked nervous, like she was debating whether to speak or not. "I heard what happened," she said. "I just wanted to say, you're not alone. They've done stuff to me too, but I was too scared to fight back. When we pressed her, she told us how the HOA had fined her $1,000 for leaving a patio umbrella open overnight. She couldn't prove it, but she was convinced it was retaliation for voting against the HOA president's re-election the year before. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just bad policy, it was organized bullying. Carla wasn't the first, and we certainly wouldn't be the last. I decided it was time to act not with fists, but with facts. The military taught me that information is power, and when you're up against an opponent who abuses authority, your best weapon is exposure. I went online, pulled up the HOA bylaws, reviewed county ordinances, and even searched court records for any history involving the HOA board. What I found was unsettling. Several board members had prior complaints filed against them, some for harassment, others for misappropriation of funds. But every complaint had either been withdrawn or mysteriously dismissed. That told me one thing: people had tried to fight back before, but had either been scared off or silenced. I began documenting everything. The incident with Megan, the fake citations, the threats, even photos of the bruise on her arm. I created a digital folder, timestamped everything, and started reaching out to other residents. At first, people were hesitant, scared of retaliation or losing their homes. But once I assured them that I wasn't going to let this slide, people started opening up. An elderly couple shared how they were threatened with foreclosure because their front door was the wrong shade of brown. A single mother showed me a stack of baseless fines that totaled over $2,000, none of which she had the means to pay. One guy even told me how the HOA president's nephew slashed his tires after a disagreement at a board meeting. The pattern was undeniable. I took all of this and began building a case, not for the police just yet, but for the community. If we wanted real change, it had to come from within. I designed a simple flyer. Have you been bullied by the HOA? You're not alone. I listed my number and email and dropped it in every mailbox on the block. Within 48 hours, I received over 30 messages. People were ready to talk. More importantly, they were ready to fight back. Meanwhile, the HOA wasn't backing down. The very next week, we received a notice in the mail stating that our front yard violated aesthetic cohesion and that we were subject to a $500 fine. The letter had no date, no clear policy reference, and no option to appeal, just a demand for money. That was their mistake. By trying to intimidate us again, they only confirmed what we already knew. They operated above the rules they were, I'm supposed to enforce. I added the notice to our growing file and began preparing for the next phase: public exposure. I called a few local journalists, especially one who covered community issues. At first, they were hesitant. HOA drama usually wasn't headline material, but when I explained that the president was misusing power, hiring her family members as fake security, and physically intimidating residents, that got their attention. I provided documents, testimonies, and offered up several neighbors willing to speak, some anonymously. Within a few days, a small article appeared online titled, HOA, Accused of Overreach and Harassment in Local Community. It didn't name names, but it was enough to cause a stir. That weekend, at least a dozen neighbors stopped by our house to thank us. A few even asked what they could do to help. It was clear the HOA's grip was loosening, and people were beginning to realize they had more power together than they ever had alone. I decided it was time to go after the root of the problem: Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. She was the one pulling the strings, issuing threats through her enforcers, and hiding behind technicalities. I learned that HOA leadership could be challenged with enough signatures from homeowners to force an emergency meeting and vote. We needed 50% of the neighborhood. It sounded impossible until we hit 60 in 3 days. The neighborhood was on fire with energy. People were calling it the Tulip Rebellion, named after the flowers Megan had planted that sparked the whole mess. It was cheesy, but it stuck. Karen got wind of what was happening and tried to discredit us. She sent letters claiming we were spreading lies, that the SEAL wasn't even a real veteran, and that the HOA had every legal right to enforce its standards. But she underestimated two things. First, that I had documented everything, and second, that I had nothing to lose. This was personal now. I wasn't just standing up for Megan, I was standing up for every person they had tried to silence. By the end of that week, we had 82 signatures, well over the majority we needed. I submitted them officially and notified Karen of our demand for an emergency vote. Her response, another fine, this time for disruption of community harmony. But the community was no longer afraid, and as I stood in front of my garage one evening, neighbors gathered around. Listening as I explained the next steps, I realized something powerful. They had pushed the wrong man. They could bully a resident, but not a SEAL, not someone trained to adapt, overcome, and protect his own. And now, there was no turning back. The emergency vote was set for Friday evening in the community clubhouse, but the days leading up to it were anything but quiet. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, went into full damage control. She called emergency board meetings, sent out mass emails painting me as a dangerous outsider, and even tried to distribute glossy flyers, calling our movement an illegal attempt to overthrow lawful governance. It was laughable, but also desperate, and it reeked of fear. She knew the tide was turning. She just couldn't stop it. In response, we did the one thing HOA tyrants hate most. We stayed organized, peaceful, and united. I created a package, clear and legal. It outlined the HOA's overreach, misuse of funds, intimidation tactics, and unqualified staff. It included screenshots of fake fines, photos of bruises, video clips from security cameras, and testimonies from at least 15 residents who were ready to speak up. It even had a budget audit done by a retired accountant in the neighborhood, who volunteered his time after reading the article online. We called it The File. Meanwhile, Megan was the heartbeat of our effort. While I handled logistics, she was out walking door to door, connecting with people. The woman they tried to scare into silence became the face of the resistance. Her tulips, yes, the same ones they tried to ban, became a symbol. People began planting yellow flowers in their own yards, some even tying yellow ribbons around their mailboxes in solidarity. Karen tried to find them too, of course, but nobody paid anymore. The spell had broken. By Wednesday, the HOA's enforcers, the same guys who grabbed Megan, had vanished. No patrols, no clipboard checks, nothing. Rumors swirled that they were suspended pending investigation, but more likely, they were told to lay low until this blew over. But it wasn't blowing over. It was building. Our garage, once a place for tools and quiet afternoons, became the unofficial HQ for a neighborhood uprising. I had a whiteboard with names, roles, and tasks. Some people coordinated transportation for elderly residents so they could attend the meeting. Others printed flyers and posted reminders. A couple of younger tech-savvy neighbors helped live our message to the private community Facebook page. And every single person brought fire with them hunger. Yes, but more than that, purpose. Thursday night. Karen made her final move. She delivered an emergency cease and desist letter to our mailbox. According to her, we were in violation of the HOA agreement by attempting to undermine the elected board through fraudulent means. I knew she was bluffing. Everything we'd done followed the bylaws. The petition had signatures. We met the required quorum, and the community bylaws explicitly allowed for a special vote with sufficient resident support. But she was betting on fear. Again, I didn't even respond to her letter. I let our actions speak. Finally, Friday arrived. I barely slept the night before, but I was ready. Megan was too. She wore a simple yellow dress and tied her hair back, composed and powerful. I wore my service pin on my shirt pocket. Not because I wanted to flex military credentials, but because I wanted people to remember that standing up against abuse isn't a crime, it's a duty. The clubhouse was packed, more than I'd ever seen. People filled the chairs, stood along the walls, even gathered outside near the windows. The air was thick with tension, but also buzzing with anticipation. The community manager opened the meeting, visibly nervous. Karen sat at the front table, flanked by two board members who looked like they regretted showing up. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, I raised my hand. Under the bylaws, any member with a community-backed petition had the right to present their case. I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I just told the truth. I laid out the timeline, the assault on Megan, the false fines, the background checks on the so-called enforcers, the financial mismanagement. I handed out copies of the file. I didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke for itself. When I played the video security footage of Megan being physically grabbed in her own driveway, the entire room went silent. You could feel the shift. Then came the testimonials. One by one, brave residents stood up and spoke. An older man named Roy, who'd lived there for 20 years, teared up describing how Karen threatened him over his American flag placement. A single mom showed photos of the tow truck taking her car at 3 a.m. over a parking violation that didn't exist. A young woman revealed that she moved out temporarily because she felt unsafe. Each voice added weight to the truth. Karen tried to respond. She blamed her staff. She accused me of inciting unrest. She called the testimonies unsubstantiated personal grievances. But it was too late. Nobody was buying it. The vote was called. Secret ballots were handed out. People voted with clarity, not fear. And when the count was read aloud, the result was decisive. 83% voted to remove Karen and dissolve the enforcement committee immediately. The remaining board members resigned on the spot. There was no cheering, no shouting. Just a quiet, collective breath of relief. The nightmare was over. And in its place, a new beginning. A temporary committee was formed on the spot to oversee operations while a fresh, transparent board was elected. I didn't volunteer. I didn't want power. I just wanted peace and justice. As Megan and I walked home that night, people shook our hands, hugged us, even apologized for not stepping up sooner. But we didn't hold grudges. We were just grateful. Megan squeezed my hand. You know, she said, this all started because of flowers. I laughed, exhausted, but proud. Tulips might have started it, I said, but truth finished it. Asterisk, the neighborhood was never going to be perfect. No community is, but from that day on, it was free from fear, free from abuse, free to plant yellow tulips and wind chimes and live without someone watching your every move. The HOA had pushed too far, and they had picked the wrong family. The weeks following the vote felt like a complete transformation. Where there had once been fear, tension, and whispered complaints, now there was a sense of freedom in the air. Kids were outside playing without nervous glances toward the street. Neighbors were chatting openly again. Front yards began to bloom with personality flags, flowers, decorative lights, all the little things that made homes feel like home again. And through it all, no one missed the patrols, the clipboards, or the constant threat of fines. It was like the neighborhood had finally remembered how to breathe. For the first time since we moved in, Megan and I felt like we actually belonged to a place ruled by power-hungry board members, but to a true community. The change wasn't just visible in decorations or landscaping. It was in people's eyes. The guarded looks were gone. The suspicion had faded. In its place was trust, hard-earned and built not by policies, but by standing together when it mattered most. Still, just because Karen and her enforcers were out didn't mean the work was done. The HOA didn't vanish overnight. Legally, the organization still existed. It had too. But now it was under completely new leadership. A temporary 5-member panel was voted in, made up entirely of residents who had no interest in control, only transparency and fairness. I was asked multiple times to join, even begged at one point, but I declined. I didn't do what I did to gain power. I just wanted to protect my wife and help give people their voices back. Instead, I helped from the sidelines, reviewing the old policies, giving advice on security reforms, and helping connect the new board with legal experts who could revise the HOA charter in a way that would prevent abuse of power in the future. One of the first decisions the new board made was to eliminate the so-called enforcement officers entirely. No more random patrols, no more fake uniforms, and no more unchecked authority given to untrained, unvetted people who thought a badge gave them permission to bully. Karen, meanwhile, disappeared from the neighborhood. Rumor had it, she sold her house in a rush, packed up in the middle of the night, and moved to towns over to live with her sister. There were still whispers that she was trying to sue someone, maybe even us, but nothing ever came of it. Her name became something people rolled their eyes at. Nobody was scared anymore. As for her nephews, the infamous HOA officers, the sheriff's department eventually charged one of them with misdemeanor assault. Thanks to Megan's testimony and the security footage, the other was cited for impersonating a security official. Nothing major, but enough to make sure they wouldn't be returning anytime soon. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. One Saturday morning, a few weeks after the vote, Megan and I were planting new flowers by the driveway. She chose lavender, this time peaceful, fragrant, beautiful. As we worked, several neighbors walked by, some stopping to chat, others just waving and smiling. One of them, a teenage girl from 3 houses down, came over and handed Megan a card. "My mom told me what you guys did," she said shyly. "Thanks for making this place safe again." Megan teared up, hugged the girl, and tucked the card into her pocket. That simple gesture meant more than anything. But the real surprise came that afternoon. The new board had organized a community reset picnic at the local park, a casual event to celebrate the neighborhood's new beginning. Megan and I decided to go, not really sure what to expect. When we arrived, the place was packed. Families with kids, retirees with lawn chairs. People we'd never even met came up to shake our hands, share food, and laugh about how strange things used to be. About halfway through the event, one of the new board members got up and asked for everyone's attention. He thanked everyone for their bravery, their willingness to speak out, and their desire to rebuild trust. Then he surprised us both by calling Megan and me up to the front. I tried to decline. This wasn't about recognition, but the crowd insisted. When we stepped forward, he handed us a small plaque. It wasn't anything fancy, just a wooden frame with a simple engraving, "For standing up when it mattered most. Thank you, Burke family." Megan held it in her hands, eyes shining, and the crowd clapped, not wildly, but warmly, genuinely. It wasn't about us being heroes. It was about a neighborhood that finally stood together. After that, things settled into a new normal. Megan and I resumed our quiet routines. Morning walks, weekend gardening, dinners on the patio. But now, those simple pleasures were no longer shadowed by anxiety. We'd earned this peace, and so had everyone else. I even started volunteering with a local veterans outreach program, something I'd been putting off since we moved in. I realized I had more to give, more than just strength or discipline. Experience, perspective, leadership, things that could help people beyond my neighborhood. Sometimes, I still think back to that day when I ran out of the garage to find Megan being manhandled in our own driveway. It still makes my blood boil, but it also reminds me of the line that was crossed. They picked the wrong house, the wrong woman, the wrong man. I didn't go looking for a fight, but when it came to protecting my family, there was never any question what I'd do. The tulips that started it all eventually faded with the season, but Megan planted more in their place. Every spring now, they bloom brighter and stronger, just like this neighborhood. Just like us. And every time I see them, I smile because those flowers were more than decoration. They were a line in the sand. A symbol of resilience. And a quiet reminder that, if you push the wrong people too far, they won't just push back, they'll change everything. Spring melted into summer, and our neighborhood settled into a peace it hadn't known in years. But beneath the calm surface, the roots of everything we'd accomplished began to grow into something even greater. What started as a defense against HOA abuse turned into a powerful story of unity, courage, and resilience, something that began to reach far beyond our quiet cul-de-sac. People from neighboring communities started to reach out. The article that had originally featured us online got shared again, this time by a bigger media outlet that focused on homeowners' rights. Emails started pouring in. Strangers from other states messaged me, asking how we organized the vote, how we stood up to an abusive board, and how they could do the same. It was overwhelming at first. I never planned to be some poster boy for HOA reform, but I realized something important. If our fight could help others avoid what Megan went through, then maybe it was worth sharing. That was when a local TV news crew called. They asked if they could interview Megan and me about what happened and how the neighborhood had turned things around. At first, Megan hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted her face on the evening news, reminding the world of the moment she'd been grabbed and humiliated by two fake enforcers. But then she looked out at our street, where kids were riding bikes, neighbors were chatting over fences, and her lavender plants were blooming beside our porch. "Let's do it," she said. "People need to know it's possible to take your peace back." The interview was short but powerful. We told the truth calmly. Honestly, we didn't slander Karen or her family. We didn't exaggerate the details. We didn't need to. The facts were enough. The footage of our packed community vote, the yellow tulips blooming on nearly every lawn, and Megan holding the small plaque we were given it, all spoke louder than anything we could say. The segment aired that Friday. By Saturday morning, we had over 100 new messages from people wanting to know more. That's when the real idea began to take shape. It started with a small meeting in our garage. Again this time, not for our neighborhood, but for people in the nearby town facing a similar problem. Their HOA had started restricting everything from trash bin placement to whether families could fly national flags. They had no idea what to do. I walked them through everything we did: the petition, the bylaws, the vote, the community coordination. Megan shared how she overcame the fear and embarrassment of being targeted. We gave them copies of our files, templates, and even contacts who helped us, and then something incredible happened. They succeeded. 3 weeks later, their HOA president resigned after a community-wide vote, and their board underwent a full audit. One of the attendees from that meeting texted me, "We couldn't have done this without your guidance. Thank you for standing up, because now, so did we." Word spread fast. Soon I was attending meetings across the county. Sometimes speaking to groups of 20 or 30 homeowners, sometimes just sitting with a single family at their kitchen table, helping them understand their rights. I wasn't being paid, and I wasn't trying to start a business. I just felt like I owed it to the people who didn't have the background I did, the training, the confidence, the patience to fight a long battle. Not everyone was a SEAL, but everyone had something worth protecting. Megan, meanwhile, began organizing a free-to-bloom garden project. It started small, just a few people planting flowers together in their yards. But within months, it had become a full-blown community movement. People donated seeds, tools, and even helped those who couldn't garden themselves. The message was simple but powerful. Grow what you love, where you live, no permission slips required. And just like that, yellow tulips became a symbol of resistance and freedom. People posted photos with the hashtag #BloomFree. And soon, even communities in other states were doing the same. A few gardening blogs picked up the story. Then a home improvement magazine reached out to do a piece on Megan and her freedom garden. She was shy at first, but warmed up once she saw how many people resonated with her story. From something painful had grown something beautiful. One evening, long after the sun had dipped below the trees, Megan and I sat out back, sipping lemonade and watching the fireflies blink over our freshly mowed lawn. I glanced over and asked, "Did you ever think it would turn into all this?" She laughed, shaking her head. "All I wanted was to plant some flowers." I smiled, and they tried to rip them out. She leaned into me and whispered, "They didn't know they were planting a revolution." I thought back to that moment in the driveway, the scream, the panic, the fury that had surged through me like a tidal wave. It had felt like the start of something terrible, but instead, it had been the beginning of change. Not just for us, for everyone who finally decided enough was enough. The new HOA board remained fair and consistent. They held open meetings, allowed community input, and perhaps most importantly made decisions based on common sense rather than control. They even hosted quarterly community barbecues, Not as some PR stunt, but just to keep people connected. The days of secret fines and intimidation were gone, and in their place stood a stronger, closer, happier neighborhood. And as the seasons changed, so did we. I finally allowed myself to relax, to fully retire, not from life, but from the constant readiness to defend. The fight was over. The mission was complete, and for once, there were no orders, no objectives, just peace. The memory of what happened would never vanish. The bruise on Megan's arm had faded long ago, but the memory of ITHR injustice, the humiliation remained. But rather than letting it define us, we turned it into something bigger. We turned it into a movement, a message, a reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to be silent. I had fought wars in other countries, faced down enemies most people could never imagine, but I never expected one of the most meaningful victories of my life would be right here on this quiet street, in a small town, standing beside my wife and a few brave neighbors who refused to back down. They came after my family, thinking we'd break, but what they really did was spark a fire they couldn't put out. And now, every time I see those yellow tulips sway in the breeze, I know exactly what they mean. Freedom, strength, family, and the kind of peace you fight for and win.